Okay, today, acoustics, psychoacoustics, unit 5, loudness and pitch. If I share screen, let's see what you'll see here. Okay, hit that puppy there, share screen, and we'll make this guy smaller. Have you ever seen this before? You ever been to Iceland? Have a look at that picture. Weird, eh? Those are my two horses. No, just kidding. Anyway. Cover psychoacoustics, loudness and pitch. And you're going to see a lot of the same slides as you saw last time, but we're explaining things a little bit further here. Now, if you take a look at this second slide, and even take a look at our first slide. Now, you'll remember this from a few weeks back, okay? We talked about what was 0 decibels SPL. We said to ourselves, 0 is 0.0002 dynes per centimeter of pressure pushing against my eardrum. In other words, what was the softest it took for a normal hearing human to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance with 2 ears? We called that 0. And then every time you multiply the pressure by 10, you go up 20 dB and all that stuff. Okay, so look at the corner here, 0. Now look at the next slide and look at 1,000 hertz, 0. Okay, so that's 0. This where I'm drawing my cursor comes from here. Okay, just tying things together. And then we said a couple of weeks ago, what if we played that same game with all the different frequencies? 500 hertz at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. How much was required to just barely hear that? Oh, maybe about 5 or 7, something like that. 100 hertz at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. And we said, oh, you're going to need about 40 decibels to just barely hear that. So we said our hearing is uneven across the frequencies, right? Okay. Now, let's turn up 1,000 hertz now so that it's 40 dB SPL. So we crank up 1,000 hertz so that it's now 40. Now and then I asked the listener, okay, remember how loud that was? Now I'm going to play a 500 hertz tone. You tell me when it sounds just as loud. And the guy says, here. Oh, so it needed to be about maybe, I don't know, 44. Let's take 100 hertz and turn it up until it sounds as loud as the 1,000 hertz tone at 1,000. I mean at 40. And you found out that 100 needed to go up to about 60. So now that 100 hertz tone sounded as loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did at 40. So every frequency on this middle curve is heard equally loud. How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL. Okay. So you'll notice that this bottom smile really is curved, and every frequency along that bottom curve was heard equally loud. How loud? Just barely audible. That's how loud. How loud was the middle? What about the middle curve? What about all the frequencies there? They're all heard equally loud too. How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone at 40 did. That's how loud. Okay, all the frequencies along this middle curve are heard equally loud. How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone was at 40 dB SPL. The third curve at the top, the miserable one. Okay, you play 1,000 hertz at 120 dB. Yikes! 120. Now, how loud did you need to turn the other frequencies in order for them all to sound equally loud? How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone at 120. So look at how this curve flattens out. Look at how this one is a little bit curved. Look at how this one's really curved. Okay? And it tells us that our normal dynamic range, our decibel distance between just barely audible, the bottom curve, and screaming loud, the top curve, you can see how that's biggest for the mid to high frequencies where my cursor is circling. But it's smaller for the very low frequencies. Take 100 hertz. I couldn't hear it till it was 40. And yet at about 125, it was too loud. Okay, so my dynamic range was 125 minus about 40. If you're looking at the same game at 1,000 hertz, I could hear it all the way down to 0, and I could hear it all the way up to 120 before it hurt. So my range was bigger there. Okay, weird. All right, now let's look at our notes. What does it say in the notes? Loudness is measured in fons. Loudness is the psychoacoustic perception of intensity. Pitch is the psychoacoustic correlate of frequency. The curves show that there's a difference between loudness and intensity. Otherwise, there wouldn't be curves. Okay, read that sentence again. The curves show there's a difference between loudness and intensity. Otherwise, they wouldn't be curved. Look at the picture again. How loud does each sound frequency, how loud is each frequency on the bottom curve? Equally loud. They're all equally loud. Yet look at the difference in decifrickin bells. Okay? The intensity is the decibels, but your loudness perception is the curves. Otherwise, they wouldn't be curves. The bottom curve, how loud does each frequency along the curve sound? Just barely audible. That's how loud. So they all sound equally loud, and yet they are vastly different decibels. And take a look at the 40. Now, when we turn up the 1,000 hertz tone so that it's 40 SPL, we call that a loudness of 40 fons. Okay, that's loud. Fons is a loudness unit. Decibels SPL is an intensity unit. Fons is loudness, dBSPL, intensity. So, look at the middle curve. Every frequency along the middle curve is heard equally loud. How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone was at 40 dBSPL. So those are all 40 fons. They're all heard equally loud. The top curve, 120 fons. Well, you cranked up 1,000 hertz till it's 120 dBSPL. That's screaming loud. Okay, now match the loudness of that with other frequencies. Take other frequencies and turn them up until they sound as loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did at 120. And you will call that whole top curve 120 fons. They all sound screamingly equally loud. How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did at 120 dBSPL. That's how loud. Okay? Interestingly, the lines flatten out. And I'll stop sharing here to just tell you this. Ghetto blasters, more politically correct, boom boxes. You push the bass boost button when the volume is soft. You push the bass boost off when the volume is cranked up. So now let's share screen and see why. Here's why. When sound is soft, you need buku bass boost to hear the bass equally loud. But when you crank up the volume, look at the top curve. You no longer need that bass boost in order to hear all the frequencies equally loud. We get it? All right. Good. We'll spend not that much more time on it. Let me see if I can get out of this thing. Good. Okay, let's read what we said here. The curves result from various resonances of the outer and middle ears. Interestingly, though, that they flatten out as the intensity increases. Look at the bottom curve. Could be MAF or MAP. You'd have to stimulate it. You'd have to stipulate it. We call it minimal audible field because 1,000 hertz touches 0. Okay, minimal audible field because the bottom curve at the 1,000 touches 0. If it did not, it would be minimal audible pressure, 1 ear. But since it touches the ground all the way down to 0, 2 ears. All right. Look at the top curve next. This is loudness discomfort across the frequency. Top curve, notice how it flattens out. Note the curves flatten out as the intensity increases. The differences in dBSPL required to hear all frequencies equally loud. That difference decreases as intensity increases. See how at low intensity levels, loudness depends on physical intensity, but also frequency. As intensity increases, however, loudness seems to become more independent of frequency. Loudness grows more rapidly, like a seed into a tree. Loudness grows more rapidly for the low frequencies. Look at the picture to see why. Look at 100 hertz. Look at 50. Go up from 50 hertz. Okay, that's barely audible, right where my cursor is. What's too loud? Here. So from a seedling into a tree, okay, loudness grew from a baby into an old man over 60 decibel range. Whereas here, loudness grew from a seed to an old man, but it took 120 dB to cross that span. You get it? So the decibel distance between the softest you can hear and the loudest you can tolerate is called your dynamic range. And dynamic range in dBSPL is larger for the mids and highs than it is for the lows. Loudness grows more rapidly over the low frequencies than it does over the highs. Your perception of just barely audible to screamingly loud, only it grew from that over a 60 dB range is what we're saying here. Fawn lines show the dynamic range area between the top and bottom curves. You'd think I wrote this. Dynamic range, largest for the mids, smaller for the lows. Fawn lines and stereos and equalizers. For soft music, to hear all frequencies equally loud, we need an artificial boost of the lows mostly, and to a lot lesser degree, the highs. Equalizer buttons, often set or shaped like a smile. Loudness switch is a poor man's equalizer. What do we mean by that? Well, let's take a look-see. Okay, look at an equalizer. There you go. From some silly PowerPoint slide off of the internet that I stole one time. Equalizers, shaped like a smile. How come? Because of this. Because of this. Because of this. All about the curves. Okay? Just something to internalize here. Yikes. Okay, now check this out. The bottom here. Fawns or the middle of the page. Fawns center around 1,000 hertz. 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dBSPL is heard at a loudness of 40 fawns. Look at the picture. 1,000 hertz tone cranked to 40 dBSPL is heard at a loudness of 40 fawns. Yep, we said that already. That we said over here as well. Same screen. Okay? And every other frequency along this middle curve is heard at 40 fawns. It's heard equally loud. How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone was heard at 40 dBSPL. That's how loud. Okay, there we go. Now let's take this home to the hardware store. Let's go to the hardware store. Sam knows a bit about hardware stores. I mean, construction and stuff like that, you know, stuff and things, fans. Let's talk about stuff, about loudness of fans, equipment that people use in bathrooms, stoves. Now let's look at how they're rated. Excuse me. The loudness of a 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dBSPL is 40 fawns, and we're going to call that 1 sone. Now I'm going to stop sharing. What is ambient room noise? What's the intensity of ambient room noise when nobody's talking? What's average speech? 65 dBSPL. right? Average conversational speech. What's yelling? Around 80, 85 dBSPL. What's ambient room noise when no one's talking? Just regular, it's about 35 to 40 dBSPL. So that's pretty soft. 40 dBSPL is not very loud. 40 dBSPL, a whisper is 50. Okay? So really quiet sounds, 40. So if we say that 40, the loudness of a one at 40 dBSPL, that's 40 fawns, yeah, because we're talking loudness. But now let's talk about calling that 40 fawns. Let's make it at the ground. Let's make a ground. Let's call it one zone. One zone. One zone is really soft. It's the loudness of a 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dBSPL. So if you go to the hardware store, or you go to a store to buy kitchen equipment, and you're looking at stove fans, you want to buy a cheap stove fan? It'll be about 3 zones. You get what you pay for. Okay? You start looking in the catalog and you start going, oh, I want that one. It's really quiet. And you look at the rating. You'll see it written, one zone. Turn on that fan, really soft, barely audible. You'll pay about $200 for it, but get what you paid for. If you have an outhouse in the back and you just want a fan out there, shoot, pay $10 for a 4-zone fan. Hey? So this is how you're taking down to reality. If you look at specs of equipment like fans, air conditioners, etc., turn over the package, look at the specs, you'll see the word zones. Okay, that's where this comes from. I lie a lot, but I'm not lying about that. Okay, here we go. Okay, back to our notes. One zone is the loudness perception for normal hearing for a 1,000 hertz tone at 40 fawns. And what's 40 fawns? The loudness of a 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dBSPL. That's how loud. Next, pitch. So we dispensed with loudness. Now let's talk about pitch. What's the subjective perception of pitch? In general, the higher the frequency, okay, the higher our perception of pitch. All right, now am I sharing screen here or what? I seem to have, there we go. Gosh, I lost you for a second there. All right, let's share screen here and look at pitch. The subjective perception of frequency. In general, the higher the frequency, the higher your pitch perception. Duh, no kidding, okay? But, big B-U-T, pitch depends mostly on frequency, but also a little bit on intensity and duration. Put it this way, and put a star by this one. A doubling of octave frequency does not necessarily correspond to a doubling of pitch perception. Just because I make 1,000 hertz, 2,000 hertz, did your pitch perception double? Not really, it went up. If I play a 2,000 hertz tone, it's going to sound louder than a 1,000. It's going to sound higher in pitch than a 1,000 hertz tone. But will it sound exactly twice as high? Not necessarily. So let's look at a picture here in your notes. Let's move over to this puppy here. There you go. Let's go. Yeah, relationship between pitch and frequency. There you go. The pitch perception of a 1,000 hertz tone is called 1 mel, M-E-L, short for Melvin. No, I don't know who. I just made mel. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me where it comes from. It's called your pitch perception of a 1,000 hertz tone is 1 mel. Your perception. Always remember, pitch is your perception of frequency. Loudness is your perception of intensity. Make a mental divorce, okay, between physics, intensity, frequency, dBSPL, hertz, and perception. Fawns, how loud was it? What was the pitch? Did the musician have perfect pitch perception? Blah, blah, blah. One's art, one's science. Okay? Now, just because you doubled the frequency, look at this. If I make the frequency 2,000 hertz, what was your pitch perception? Go up, 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 up. Here. It's not double. Your pitch perception of a 1,000 hertz tone, I'll correct myself, is 1,000 mels. Your pitch, mels. Read it along the vertical axis. Frequency, horizontal. Your perception of pitch in units of mels, vertical axis. 1,000 hertz is, we call that the center. We'll call that 1,000 mels. That's your pitch perception. Crank up the frequency to 2,000 hertz. Look at that. My pitch perception went up by 1.5, not 2. It went up, obviously, but did it go up by 2? Not really. And this is all just to tell you. Okay, and you know, in this field, we don't sit there talking about mels and fawns and sones and all, but it's just, all of this is mainly to tell you that your perceptions are not complete mirrors of reality. Okay, the human body twists and bastardizes sound. We're not a perfect machine. So just because you doubled the frequency does not mean your pitch perception doubled. If you doubled the frequency, your pitch perception went up, of course, but it wasn't a one-to-one relationship. And I guess that is the main point I wish to hammer home. It's the same here. This picture here is showing you exactly the same thing. Frequency along the horizontal, pitch perception in mels. 1,000 hertz tone is heard at a pitch perception of 1,000 mels. If I go to 2,000 hertz, it's heard at a pitch perception 1.5 times higher. Okay? Please don't think you have to memorize the numbers. I couldn't care less. I just want you to get the idea that it's not a one-to-one reality. You know, it doesn't go one-to-one that way. All right. Now let's keep going so we can get this unit here all done. So now we've done pitch. So now we move down to what they call frequency resolution. Let's get back to this one here, because this deals a lot with you and me and hearing aids. And
Can I
your
ask a question quick?
Yes, absolutely.
So in your notes it says that 2,000 mels equals a tone that sounds 2 times as high.
Boy, let's see, where was I lying there? Let me see. Let me see if where it says that here. 2,000 mels, okay. Okay. Mel, unit 1,000 mels, a pitch of 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL. 2,000 mels would be a tone that sounds twice as high. 500 mels, a tone that sounds, yes, yeah, that's correct. But actually, if you look at your diagram here, let's look at 2,000 mels. 2,000 mels, what is that in frequency? My gosh, that's about 3,000 to 4,000 hertz. Okay?
Oh, I got it.
Okay, great. No, that's good. Good question. All right. Fair enough. All right. Frequency resolution. Frequency resolution. Okay? This takes us home to our clients. Remember a couple of weeks ago we talked about absolute threshold, differential threshold. Back to differential threshold and absolute. Absolute is, did you hear it or did you not? When you're hot, you're hot. When you're not, you're not. Okay? Carry the bride over the threshold. Okay? You're either in the hotel room or you're in the hallway. Okay? Did you hear it or did you not? Differential is different. You already hear the sound, and we said, what's the smallest change you needed to make for you to detect that there was a change? So if you're hearing 1,000 hertz, if I make it 1,001 hertz, will you hear a difference? Probably not. If you're playing 1,000 hertz, I'll probably have to make it at least 1,005, 1,010 for you to begin to notice that there's a change, okay? That's called frequency resolution. Your ability to detect tiny changes in frequency. Now, what happens with hearing loss? With hearing loss, that goes down. Frequency resolution gets worse. In other words, if it takes a normal hearing person 5 hertz, and I'll stop sharing for a second here. Let's say it takes a normal hearing person 5 hertz difference to hear a difference. I play a 1000 hertz tone, you hear it. I play a 1001, you can't hear the difference. 1002, you can't hear the difference. 1003, you can't hear the difference. 1004, can't hear the difference. 1005, yes, I think there's a difference there. Okay, that's your frequency resolution, 5 hertz. Okay, now let me go in and damage some hair cells. If I go in and damage hair cells inside your cochlea, I can play 1000 hertz, okay. 1001, you won't hear a difference. 1002, you won't hear a difference. 1003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Maybe by the time I get to 10 or 15, I think I might, yeah. Okay, so they're delta F. They're just noticeable difference. They're difference Lyman for frequency. The difference in frequency required for them to notice a difference is bigger. Their comb doesn't have 100 teeth. Their comb has about 10 teeth. So when they're combing their hair, it looks like mine, okay? Not very good, all right? All just kind of, it's not all coiffed because I'm not using a fine-tooth comb. That's what hair cell damage does to hearing. It not only decreases your ability to hear, not only does it make your absolute thresholds higher, so that you need, say, 50 decibels instead of 0 to just barely hear, but it also screws you up in another dimension, frequency. Your ability to detect differences goes down. That's why they can't separate speech from background noise as well. That's why people hate hearing aids. Very simple. Their frequency resolution is worse. You and I can go in a bar and sit there having a beer and some wings, and it's kind of loud, but we can still kind of, yeah, we're all right. It's harder to hear, but we can still. Now you take a hearing impaired person, put hearing aids on that person, have him or her walk into that situation. They're going to experience worse problems than you and me. The reason why is their cochlea. The hair cells are damaged, and they can't distinguish between frequencies close together anymore. And it's all about anatomy. The peak of their traveling waves is now dull and rounded. So going back to good old frequency resolution, okay? Recall differential thresholds, specifically JND or difference Lyman. Frequency discrimination is the ability to detect changes in frequency. Delta F is smallest for the low to mids, larger for very high frequencies. Who cares? Don't worry about that. Frequency resolution, ability of your auditory system to resolve or distinguish individual components of a complex sound. It gets worse with sensory neural hearing loss and outer hair cell damage. Now, this is kind of a weird topic, and now we'll kind of have a little bit more fun. All right. Okay, kind of a midpoint here. Here on the Pacific West Coast, or I'll say the wet coast, it's about 12 noon. In Missouri, I should say in Missouri, it's probably 2 p.m. I got the window open a bit. It's a nice day, but I'm kind of getting a little bit cool, so I'll throw on a little sweater here. Okay, cool. Now, here we go. Place theory, Helmholtz. This was a guy who lived in a van down by the river in the 1800s who discovered that the cochlea was tonotopic. Okay, specific frequencies were represented in specific places. Helmholtz. See how this ties in with your anatomy course 120? They're all connected, okay? So Helmholtz discovered that the base of the cochlea represents highs and the apex of the cochlea represents lows. Cool, okay, next. So he's the guy that said specific frequencies are represented in specific places, right where I'm bold facing there. Cochlea is tonotopic. Okay, put a star by that puppy. That's the most common theory of pitch perception. Traveling wave peaks stimulates hair cells in some particular region of the cochlea. Covered that in 120. Traveling wave in cochlea is asymmetrical, right? Steep front, long tail toward the base. We covered that in anatomy. Outer hair cells amplify and sharpen the peak of the traveling wave, blah, blah, blah. Anatomy, cochlear physiology. Now this guy, Rutherford, he had a different theory of pitch perception, of how we humans distinguish pitch. Helmholtz said the place theory. Specific frequencies are represented in specific places along the cochlea. That's how we perceive pitch. That's the one most people buy into. That's the one we describe in anatomy class. That's the one we talk about the most. But there's a couple of things that are not well explained by Helmholtz pitch perception theory, his place theory. Helmholtz place theory, put a star there. Cochlea tonotopic. 99.999% of clinicians and people believe in that theory, myself included. Okay? But Rutherford said there's a couple of weird things that theory does not explain very well. And here we go. You're sitting at the drugstore having an ice cream cone, and somebody across the parking lot is revving a motorbike. Each is a blast of white noise. Because you're increasing the revs, all of a sudden your pitch perception went up. How come? Each white noise blast is exactly the same acoustics. How come when I play them really fast, your pitch perception went up? Now, brown cow, that is not explained by place theory at all. This is blasts of white noise should make the same traveling waves in your cochlea. Exactly. How come just because they're played faster, you get a pitch perception of increased pitch? It's not explained. And that's how science works. It comes out with theories that try to explain what happens. But sometimes what happens isn't really explained very well by some particular theory. So you have to kind of scratch your head and go, no, maybe there's something else going on here. There's another thing that's not very well explained by the place theory. Rather strange. Let's go to this guy here and look for a slide that I'm trying to show you here. Let's see if I can find that guy. Oh, typical me, it's probably not in here. Great, Ted. Okay, not the end of the earth, but it's still, here we go, yeah. There we go. Yeah. I hate this black thing up here. I wish it would go away. There, thank you. Okay. So now I'm playing you 4 tones. 200 hertz, 400 hertz, 600 hertz, 800 hertz. Your overall perception of those 4 tones is going to sound rather like 200 hertz. An illustration of how a complex tone can be made by adding together pure tones at harmonic frequencies. The bottom panel shows the effect of removing the fundamental component. Now, your overall pitch perception of this complex sound on the top is going to be 200 hertz. How come? Because all the harmonics are 200 hertz apart. If I take away the fundamental frequency, you're still going to hear an overall perception of 200 hertz, even though you took this one away. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 versus 2 plus 3 plus 4, your waves are going to change a little bit, but basically your pitch perception is largely going to be quite similar. There's the 2 things, the case of the missing fundamental, and the second one was the motorbike revving, periodicity pitch. First periodicity pitch. Probably explained by the temporal theory of neuron firings, but still has to be heard to be believed. Think of a series of noise explosions like a motorbike. Blap, 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 blap. Periodic interruptions of white noise explosions gives your pitch perception, however many of those you heard per second. Drun, drun, drun. Nothing in the white noise gives the pitch. Only the interruption rate does. In other words, how many of those revs you heard per second. Okay? Works up to about 200 times a second. Some people can hear it even up to about 800 times a second. Case of the missing fundamental, also not very well explained by Helmholtz's place theory. Pitch of complex tone, not necessarily determined by the pitch of the fundamental frequency. Complex tone with harmonics 200 hertz apart, you hear the pitch as around 200 hertz. Fundamental frequency. Take out the fundamental frequency, you will still hear the same low frequency pitch. It comes from the residual harmonics. Now, what is that temporal theory? Rutherford. Let's read it. He says the nerve firings occur. Okay, he says every time you hear a sound, your eighth nerve fires. So if your eighth nerve hears a 500 hertz tone, it's going to fire 500 times. If it hears a 125 hertz tone, it's going to fire 125 times. If it hears 1,000 hertz, it's going to fire 1,000 times. Oops, stop, Rutherford, because nerves can't fire more than about 500 times a second. Can't. It's impossible. So how do we detect the pitch of 2,000 hertz? Oh, he says, Rutherford, that's when the nerves start volleying. Some fire twice a second and some fire 500 times a second. 2 times 500 is 1,000. Some fire at 4 times a second, some fire at 500. 4 times 5 is 2,000. So he called that his volley theory. It's the amount of times that the eighth nerve is firing. That tells you the pitch. It's not really the place along the basilar membrane, like Helmholtz is saying. Well, let's just take it home here. Helmholtz is probably right, but there's a couple of things in Helmholtz's theory that do not explain very well. And one is the case of the missing fundamental, and the second one is called periodicity pitch. Periodicity pitch is the firing, revving of a motorbike. The case of the missing fundamental says, isn't it weird? Even if I remove the fundamental frequency, I still hear the same overall pitch. How come? Because the harmonics are placed equally apart, and it's that nerve firing 200 times a second or whatever. That's going to give me what the pitch was. So when you look at these nerve firings here, bring this picture closer. Oh, these harmonics are 200 hertz apart. Well, that's what's going to tell the brain I'm hearing 200 hertz, even though you removed the fundamental frequency. Okay, well, whatever. Kind of boring, but there it is. Now let's finish this topic right here. To the bottom of page 2. To love from the bottom of me heart. Okay, take a look here. Sensory neural hearing loss and typical psychoacoustic results. Loss of frequency resolution, as we talked about, due to outer hair cell damage. Both the traveling wave and eighth nerve tuning curves become shallow. More on this later on in masking next week. But just let me say this. A person cannot distinguish between frequencies very close together. The person thus cannot separate speech from background noise as well. Okay, we've covered that, so make sure you put a star by that. It's very important. The next one where to put a star is unilateral hearing loss and directionality. We've covered that one 2 weeks ago. Okay, when you lose hearing in one ear, you have difficulty localizing the direction of sound. Here's something, this last part right here, you should put number 3. Okay, this is a third thing to consider. So we'll look at that guy here and go more toward the bottom of the page. Here we go. Oh, so here's a thing about frequency resolution. Here's an outer ear, middle ear, cochlea, like keys on a piano. This would be Helmholtz, the place theory. Specific frequencies represented in specific places. That's generally the most accepted theory. Watch what happens with hair cell damage. You've lost frequency resolution. The keys on your piano got fatter. Now instead of playing with fingers, now you're doing this kind of stuff. Okay, it's just not as fine-tuned anymore. So now you've lost the ability to distinguish between frequencies close together. Here's something else that occurs with sensory neural loss. And this is an important one for your hearing aids courses. You guys are going to run into this 1,000 times. All next year, this is what you're going to see constantly. Look at this graph very carefully. It represents decibels from 0 to 100. They could be 0 dB HL, could be SPL, who cares? Doesn't matter. Just decibels from hell, okay? 0 being very soft, 100 being loud. This is the vertical axis is your perception of those different intensities. And now follow the 45-degree angle black line. That's normal loudness growth. So let's say we're talking at 1,000 hertz, whatever, because frequency isn't on here. But this is in general for almost all frequencies. Here goes. 10 is going to sound soft. 20 is going to sound soft. 50 or 60 to a normal hearing person will sound comfortable. 80 is going to start sounding loud. And 100 is going to start sounding too loud, right? I mean, that's duh. Now let me rip out your hair cells. Like a thief in the night, Ted Venema went in and ripped out hair cells, outer hair cells from your cochlea. Okay, now you're just left with inner hair cells. So now you can't hear soft sounds below 50 dB very well. Okay, what does that mean? That means now 50 to 60 sounds very soft. Follow me? Because you can't hear sounds below 50. Outers help the inners pick up sounds below 50. I've just removed your outer hair cells. So now you can't hear until 50. So now 50 sounds really soft. And yet 100 sounds too loud. So your loudness tolerance, your ceiling, is identical to someone with normal hearing. But look at your loudness growth. Follow my cursor. Look at how steep this black line is. Because growing from a baby into an old man, it happened over a 50 decibel range. Look at that. Whereas with normal hearing, the growth from a baby to an old man took place over 100 years. Okay? But when you've got hearing loss, 50 is the baby. 50 is the floor. 50 is the seed from the tree. And yet 100 is the end of the tree's life. So my decibel distance from my floor to my ceiling has become smaller. And notice I am not moving both hands together. I'm keeping my right hand here at the ceiling of this weird room here, and I'm only raising my left hand. Normal dynamic range, reduced dynamic range. Loudness tolerance is the ceiling. It doesn't change much with sensory neural loss. Deafness means my floor has touched the ceiling. That's someone who's using sign language. You yell in his ear, it's going to hurt just like it does for someone with normal hearing. Deafness just means the person can't hear anything until it hurts. So always remember that about sensory neural loss. Conductive loss is a plug in the ear. So both the floor and the ceiling go up together. You put earplugs in your ear to give yourself a conductive hearing loss on purpose. You don't want to hear soft sounds where you can't because you plugged your ear, but by gum, you can tolerate loud sounds. Easy peasy Japanese. Sit on the lawnmower, go for it. It's 140 dB, no problem. You got your ears plugged. Okay? You've elevated your threshold to about 50 and you can tolerate 150. So it's just like your elevator just kind of went up. The floor and the ceiling, like a box, just went up. But sensory neural is, the box got smaller. And that's it's a central concept of our entire field because this is what hearing aids do. Hearing aids use compression. And next year you'll be reading my book called Compression for Clinicians. And what is compression? It means hearing aids amplify soft sounds by a lot. Look at the arrows. And they amplify average sounds by less. And they amplify loud sounds by little or nothing at all. That's why hearing aids cost so much. They amplify different inputs by different amounts. Input plus gain is output. Input in dBSPL. 10 dBSPL input, the hearing aid's going to amplify the crap out of it so that the person can hear. 50 decibels SPL, hearing aid's going to start backing off already. Input, if my input is 65 dB SPL, average conversational speech, how much can I add to 65 before it begins to hurt? Not much. What starts to hurt? Around 120 dB SPL? 120 minus 65 is only what? I don't even know. I suck at math. About 60? Okay? So the most I can amplify speech by is 60. And if I start to talk at 80, I can't amplify by 60 anymore because 80 and 60 is 140. The hearing aid's got to back off, Jack. Now the hearing aid can only amplify by about 30 to 40. Okay? That, in one word, is called compression. You're squeezing a big dynamic range into a little dynamic range. You're compressing it. You're amplifying soft sounds by a lot, and you're amplifying average sounds by less, and you're amplifying loud sounds by little or nothing at all. Think of an amplifier that constantly is changing the amount by which it's amplifying. Okay? That's why hearing aids cost what they do. They're constantly changing the amount by which they are amplifying. They're trying desperately to imitate outer hair cells. The outer hair cells are damaged, and so you've got an electronic gadget in your ear that's imitating what the outer hair cells used to do, amplifying especially sounds below 50, because the person can't hear those sounds. So the focus of hearing aids today is lifting the floor, amplifying soft sounds to bring them above the guy's hearing thresholds. So I can, if the guy's got a 50 decibel hearing loss, I can amplify a 5 dB sound by 50, because 5 and 50 is 55, no problem. If the guy's got a 50 dB hearing loss, I can't amplify 50 decibels by 50 anymore, because now I'm at 100. It's like, back off. So the louder the sound input, the less the gain. Compression. All right, we're just about at the end of today. I can go out and get some lunch because I'm starving to death. My mother used to kill me when I'd say that. You're not starving to death. Only children in Africa are starving to death. How dare you talk like that? Anyway, take a look and see if there's anything I missed here. Oh yeah, now next week we'll talk a little bit about tuning curves, and I think you're going to be talking a little bit about that in anatomy class as well in 120, in about an hour. But always remember, and I'll just finish with this here, just as a roundabout description. Normal inner and outer hair cells, damaged outer hair cells. What's that going to do? Look at what these outer hair cells do. Okay, without them, you have a dull, rounded set of traveling waves. Lots of them, but they're dull and rounded. This guy's hearing a low-pitched tone, but look at where the peak is. Look at how broad the peak is. His delta F, his ability to distinguish between frequencies close together, has gone down the toilet. This person here has healthy outer hair cells. They're amplifying, number one, and sharpening the peak of the traveling wave. So all of his traveling waves have sharp peaks, regardless of whether the traveling waves are here, 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 or here. It doesn't matter. They're all sharpened. Picture again of the same thing. Picture again showing you the same thing. I can have two frequencies close together. This is an unrolled cochlea. It's got two sharp traveling wave peaks, easily to distinguish from each other. Rip out your hair cells, you've got the middle. Smaller traveling waves, dull rounded peaks. Take pieces of plastic called hearing aids, put them on your ears. I've made this middle wave into a bigger one, but I have not restored the sharpness. That is gone. Okay? That's why people in hearing aids mix like oil and water. This is showing you the same thing. Here's a hearing loss on an audiogram, and this is showing you in dBSPL. The bottom blue curve could be minimal audible pressure. These are decibels SPL, going up and down. This is frequency along the bottom. This bottom blue curve is 0 dB HL, where my cursor is. Okay, we've covered that. But look what happens with his hearing loss. His floor is elevated, but his ceiling of loudness tolerance isn't. So his dynamic range is smaller in the high frequencies. His dynamic range is bigger in the lows because he's got normal hearing in the lows. Eighth nerve fibers are coiled like a rope. We'll be discussing this very soon in anatomy class. We're moving on to the eighth nerve soon. The eighth nerve is also tonotopic. Lows are on the inside of the eighth nerve. High frequencies at the base of the cochlea are wrapped on the outside of the eighth nerve. The eighth nerve is like a rope with thousands and thousands of fibers. That's how you should think of the eighth nerve. We'll be covering that more in anatomy class. These are called tuning curves of the eighth nerve. Let's just take one fiber. Take this fiber right where I'm drawing. Grab that one fiber and find out to what frequency is it tuned. Okay, let's look at this top right one here. Frequency along the horizontal, and how many decibels did it take to stimulate that particular fiber? This one right here. I'm going to steal this one right here from Sam's ear. Okay, now I've stolen that one. I picked on Sam too much. I went to Renee's ear instead. I ripped out that fiber, and I want to find out to what frequency is that fiber tuned to. And we'll find out, hey, this is frequency. It's tuned to that frequency because fewest decibels was required to get that particular fiber to fire. If I went below, it took more decibels to get that neuron fiber to fire. If I went higher in frequency, whoa, it took way more. This shows you that the eighth nerve is tonotopic, that every stinking fiber in the eighth nerve is tuned to a specific set of hair cells. If it's the hair cells here, or hair cells here, or if it's the hair cells here, every fiber is tonotopic. Specific frequencies are represented in specific places, and each fiber has a tuning curve. And these tuning curves, there's 6 of them here, are from 6 different fibers of the many thousands of fibers in the eighth nerve. They also look rather asymmetrical, don't they? Just like the traveling wave. Enough on that. I think I've, what do you call it, in the vernacular, I think I've pissed you off enough for today. Anyway, this has been a nice talk on, what do you call it, Unit 5, Psychoacoustics, Pitch, and Loudness. I think next week we'll look at masking. Has nothing to do with Halloween, but it does deal a little bit with masking, keeping the good ear busy during a hearing test, all kinds of stuff like that. And masking, we're going to find out too, that low frequencies mask highs better than highs mask lows. You heard that in anatomy a couple of weeks ago. We'll be discussing that further. The rumbling of a truck covers the canary much better than the loud peeping of a canary covers the rumbling of a truck. Background noise covers high-frequency consonants. The bull, El Toro, in the china shop easily masks high-frequency consonants. So next week, I believe it's Unit 6, masking in psychoacoustics. Anyway, any questions? All right, going once, going twice. All right, cheers. We'll see you guys, okay?
See ya.
Have a good week, or I'll see you, whoever shows up for 120. Sam, get to work. You got work to do. All right, see you later.